Autorità, signore e signori.
Ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome to the second edition of MED.
My name is ABOUL-GHEIT. I'm the Secretary General of the Arab League.
Hello, how do you do? Boris Johnson.
How are you?
Nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
TIMMERMANS.
Yes, here it is.
Yes, thank you. It's a big deal they've laid on.
Yes. Ready? Okay. All right. Good afternoon. I'm Vali NASR. I'm the Dean of Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. And we have a panel discussing, building on the comments of the Foreign Minister in the earlier session about how to proceed with a new order in the Mediterranean. As we heard, it's very clear that some of the greatest challenges facing the international order, and Europe in particular, are now coming from the dynamics in the Mediterranean, in this southern shore and its eastern shore. And in some ways, they have now overshadowed some of the larger problems that Europe had been grappling with, including internal financial crisis, as well as issues like Ukraine. One fact that has become very clear as a consequence of the scale of the problems that we have been facing in the Mediterranean is that this is a region, in particular a view of Europe that saw it as essentially a continental concept, is now very seriously challenged by the dynamics of what is happening in the eastern and southern Mediterranean and the way in which it has impacted Europe, even internal political dynamic within Europe, in unexpected ways in the past year. And also, it has become very clear that one of the key issues that is pushing some of these concerns is a great deal of security and economic disparity between the northern shore of the Mediterranean and its southern and eastern shore. And thinking about a new order, ultimately, that is something the international community, Europe, countries of the southern and eastern shore of the Mediterranean would have to grapple with. The core problem that we have confronted and is really pushing this issue over the past year are twofold. One is the issue of refugees and mass movement of people across the Mediterranean. If we look at the numbers that have exploded from around 50,000 a year between 2008 and 2013 to about 1 million over the past year since the explosion of the conflicts in Libya and Syria, it speaks to a very important population dynamic in this region. And the second one is the issue of security and more clearly terrorism that has also been a consequence of developments in the Middle East and in North Africa. The key problems that a new order would have to deal with is first and foremost the issue of failed states, states that do not have the institutional means to govern over their territories, provide basic social needs and economic needs to their population, but more importantly, provide security over their territories. Libya and Syria, of course, come to mind, but there are other potentials in the region as well. And the second major issue is economic vulnerability in the region. We saw a spate of popular protests sweep across the region 4 or 5 years ago as a consequence of lack of jobs, lack of economic prosperity, impact of change in global food prices, and we may very well witness a second round of such protests coming if oil prices remain low and they impact the region in negative ways. The challenge in the short run for the international community in any kind of a Helsinki-like process is first and foremost is to reestablish security in the region. But the long-run challenge is really to build an economic framework that will provide greater stability in relations between the northern shores of the Mediterranean and its southern and eastern shore. So as we speak with the panel, I think the key issues that we would have to think about is that in the very short run, the agenda before the international community is how to end wars in Libya, in Syria, and also to some extent in Iraq. There is a concerted international effort to do that, but even at the military level, this is still an open issue, and it's not very clear how these conflicts will come to an end. But even if once we arrive there, an important component of trust building that the foreign minister referred to is arriving at a political settlement for these conflicts, post-conflicts, that would be viable, would be sustainable, that would be the buy-in, would have the buy-in of not only the international community, but more importantly, the neighbors and regional actors. And in this regard, the key regional actors in the dynamics of the conflict in the region, I would say, are three. One is Turkey, with which Europe has had a great deal of interaction, is a member of NATO. However, over the issue of refugees and particularly over the climate after the failed coup in Turkey, there has been tension, or there has been issues in this relationship. But Turkey remains a very key player in ending this conflict. The second is Iran, which plays a very important role in Iraq in the fight against ISIS. It plays a very important role in Syria and is an important actor. Europe played an important role in the conclusion of the nuclear deal. The fate of that deal now remains an important point of consideration after the recent elections in the United States. But the direction of Europe and US's engagement with Iran and the future of the nuclear deal is also something to consider. And the third is the Arab world, and both components of it, all the way from the Persian Gulf and North Africa. And this is a region that has obviously been battered by conflicts that have been going on in it. And it is also the best place to engage the region in terms of its economy, and in terms of managing the flow of refugees and managing the conflict. So in North Africa, from Morocco to Algeria to Egypt, and in the Levant, Egypt and also the Persian Gulf monarchies play a very important role. One issue to consider is that often we've approached these different actors in the Middle East separately in the context of bilateral issues with the international community. However, going forward, if we are to think of a regional order, of a Helsinki-like process, it's important to engage Turkey, Iran, and the Arab world together in the context of a single framework with view to a single objective of peace and security in this broad region. We know that there are rivalries and there are tensions between the regional actors, and engaging them along the fault line of those rivalries will not serve the goal of having a regional process that would actually build trust building and would provide viable stability. Finally, in the longer run, the issues in the region and the concept of a regional order will have to have an economic logic to it. It would have to build on relations of trade, people, investment across the Mediterranean. The migration from North Africa and Eastern Mediterranean to Europe, even before the current refugee crisis, reflected a particular kind of an economic dynamic, that people flowed from poorer economies to richer economies, but investment and trade did not follow in the opposite direction. And as a result, there is both the push factors and the pull factors dictated a particular flow of population. Instability in the region, weak economy in the region is likely to encourage that. ultimately, the international community and particularly Europe has to think of the Mediterranean as a region, think of its economic problems at a regional level, and adopt policies that ultimately will reduce the disparity in the economies between the eastern and southern shore of the Mediterranean and the northern shore of the Mediterranean. Without that, ultimately, this is going to be a continuous catch-up game. The good news is that there is much to work with. Mr. Descalzi talked about the oil and gas investments in this region. Now, with discovery of new gas fields in Egypt, with potentialities in Libya, in Algeria, there's ways of thinking about of a regional energy network that would provide an economic basis to regional interaction and engagement. But there are also economies that have been acting as emerging markets, particularly in North Africa. If one were to look at Morocco, for instance, there are models to think about how economic engagement could work to bring stability to the region. Now, thinking broadly about how do we arrive at a new framework is a tall order, given the scale and number of crises we're dealing with the region. And we obviously have an excellent panel to discuss this. And I will give them the floor in order that you have in your agenda. We will start with the Honorable Ahmed ABOUL-GHEIT, who's the Secretary General of the Arab League, and then Honorable Mr. Boris Johnson, who's the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs of the United Kingdom, and Honorable Frans Timmermans, who's the first Vice President of the European Commission. And after they've concluded, we'll engage in a conversation and then take it from there. Mr. ABOUL-GHEIT, please.
So you will start with me?
Yes, please.
Very good then. You see, I flew today 8 hours. I just arrived, and I lost my papers. I'm not privileged like this. Secretary, give me your papers, please. Now, the issue of Helsinki-like arrangement for a new order in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. It's a good idea, positively good, though there has to be, of course, conditions that would enable such arrangement to take place. In southern Mediterranean and in the Middle East, I think, never in the last 200 years did we witness the destruction we are witnessing today in the region. Never before. And I preclude very much so that it would happen again in the next 500 years. Major states have been lost or in the verge of being destroyed, fully destroyed. So that is a situation that needs tackling. At the same time, the current situation, we have the Arab world, as Vali said. Then we have the neighbors of the Arab world. And it is not limited to Iran and Turkey. You have also Israel in the midst of that situation. Then you have the Western powers and Russia. Those are the main players today. Some of them are negatively affecting the situation. In all honesty, I see a country claiming that they control 4 Arab capitals. That should not be. I see a situation in Palestine where the occupation is continuing and settlement activity is taking place all the time, and no one objects to what is happening in Palestine. That is a second point. A third point, a civil war taking place across the region, from Libya to Syria to Iraq to Yemen. A civil war that is not, sadly, in Europe, people are characterizing it as the Arab Spring. I call it sadly, the Arab destruction. The Arab destruction. Fourth, you have terrorism. Terrorism across the board, everywhere, even in places where they were immune of such malaise. So how would we tackle all such issues through Helsinki approach? Again, in all honesty, I find it very difficult to perceive a Helsinki process or a Helsinki pattern without settling the 4 questions or the 5 questions I raised. You have to end the occupation of the Palestinian territories. And I am amazed, Vali, that you didn't mention at all in your remarks making reference to the continuation of the occupation. Because the occupation, believe it or not, in my opinion, and I kept warning all my colleagues for more than 20 years. I was Egyptian foreign minister for 7, 8 years. I kept telling everybody, be careful. Arab youth is angry, and they resort to violence because of that anger. And since the national state does not provide them with answers to the question of Palestine, they resort to religion. And they go to extremes when it comes to religion. We have to work on the Arab national state. The Arab national state has to be revived. And not only the Arab national state, we have to ensure the inviolability of borders, the sovereignty of the national Arab state. In the absence of this, you will have entities, and the fighting would continue and the civil war would continue. So the first order of the day, in my opinion, is how to preserve the national state in Libya, for instance, in Syria, to ensure that Iraq is not dismembered as they are trying to dismember Iraq, and to stop the neighbors from intervening. I do not understand at all, someone claiming that I will insist on having my troops inside your territory because they are a security or an insurance policy against my dismemberment myself. I'm talking about Turkey. So there has to be rules, there has to be arrangements. We have to ensure certain conditions, and then, and only then, we start talking about a new order or a new settlement for the whole region, whether it is Eastern Mediterranean or Southern Mediterranean. Peace, security are must, but the national state is a must, and not only law and order, but also economic revival. And economic revival, if such states are left to their own, I'm sure they will manage. A final point before my time is up. Please stay away from our region after we agree on a certain course. Why is it so? Because you insisted to intervene through certain idealisms that were carrying you in Britain, in the United States, and in Western Europe. That led to disasters unforeseen in our history. Disasters unforeseen in our history. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. And I agree with quite a lot of what ABOUL-GHEIT just had to say.
Enough that you agree with me.
It is. Quite a lot, absolutely. Certainly, I agree passionately with what you had to say, Abu, about the need for leadership and the need to revive the Arab nation state. I think that is very true and something that is very hard to achieve. Paolo, thank you very much for having me along today. Ladies and gentlemen, I will be very, very quick. I just want to say that obviously I'm the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, and we are deeply committed to this area and to the security and stability of the Mediterranean, and I offer in evidence of that what we are doing. I hope you won't mind me just cantering quickly through some of the things that we are doing to promote security. 2 British warships with Op Sophia, HMS Enterprise and RFA Mounts Bay. They are we are loyally following the orders. Paolo, of an Italian admiral from the Italian flagship ITS Garibaldi, with its operational headquarters, of course, here in Rome. So, key point number 1, our country may have voted to leave the European Union. That in no sense means that we have left Europe, and our commitment to working with our partners remains strong for the security and stability of this region. A 3rd British warship, HMS Mersey, is supporting NATO operations in the Aegean, and as you know, Britain also retains its bases in Cyprus and in Gibraltar. And there's more good news than you may think. Since the launch of Operation Sophia in June last year, 29,000 people have been rescued from the Mediterranean. 340 vessels used by people smugglers have been destroyed. And I'm glad to say that HMS Enterprise has itself saved 9,000 people and destroyed 117 boats. Elsewhere around the whole region, the UK has established a task force to hunt down organised crime gangs which run the people trafficking networks, and this brings together people from our National Crime Agency, the UK Border Force and Immigration Enforcement. And that task force is operating across 17 nations in Europe, including Africa, and they've conducted so far 185 operations to disrupt migration, but illegal migration. But everybody in this room recognizes that the problems are more fundamental, and what we are trying to do is really address the symptoms. And we need to think about what we're doing to address the origins of this huge pressure of humanity, and what we are doing to stop the source of illegal migration. I remember one of your predecessors, Paolo, was a man called Gianni De Michelis. Does anyone remember Gianni De Michelis? He was a very large disco dancing, he probably still around, Italian socialist. He wrote a book about Italia, about nightclubs, I think. But he came up with I remember 20 years ago, he came up with a wonderful idea, which was that all the countries of Europe should pay a certain proportion of their GDP, maybe 25 years ago, of their GDP to the North African littoral area, to that part of the Mediterranean, in order to promote economic growth and to address the root causes of migration. You probably like that idea of migration. I thought you might. And all I can ask is, what state would we now be in if that had been taken up? And is it time to think about it now? All I can say is that we in the UK do spend what we can. We've got a £280 million fund for the Maghreb on top of our existing aid programs. We've trebled our staff in our embassies in North Africa. And of course, we are focusing on all the ways that we can to counteract terrorism, which, Abu, you rightly mentioned, particularly to help with aviation security, because it's the threat to aviation that is doing so much damage to the economies of that area. And we are trying our best to help that. But in the end, to get back to my my first point. So much depends, everything really depends, on the governments themselves. And when you look at Libya, where's the source of so many migrants through up to Italy, yes, we've got to try to sort out an agreement between the conflicting parties there. We've got to try to get back to the Skhirat Accords. We've got to make that work, as Paolo was saying earlier on. That's absolutely important. The international community should be working hard to achieve that. But in the end, it must be up to the Libyans themselves, working through their own processes to build their own legitimate national government to do that. And I just want to conclude by paying tribute to the leadership of Italy in this matter and to all the work that is being done, particularly to train the Libyan Coast Guard. Italy has deployed a military hospital in Libya to treat fighters who've been wounded in battle against Daesh. Italy contributes 6,000 troops to the UN peacekeeping forces around the world. That's more than any other EU country. And the Italian army is second only to the United States when it comes to deploying boots on the ground in Iraq, where the Italian soldiers are providing vital training and logistical support for the campaign against Daesh. So if you look at that campaign, and you look also at what is happening in Libya, I think that you can argue that by working together and working with determination, we have ensured that the picture today is a good deal brighter than it was a year ago. And I end up with that most important thought, that we, an island in the northwest of Europe, we understand completely that the frontier of our security, is in the Mediterranean and along that coastline. We absolutely understand that. Our commitment to that is rock solid and will be for the foreseeable future. And to get back to I remember Gianni de Michelis proposed that there should be a policy called Mare Nostrum. I don't know what happened to the Mare Nostrum policy, but I approve of it wholeheartedly. And I want you to know it's not Mare Vestrum, as we say, but Mare Nostrum too, from a British point of view. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Please. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you, Paolo, for inviting me to attend this meeting, which is a forum for debate. So I'll try and share a few ideas about what you've said, the possibilities of using Helsinki type of mechanisms to do something about the situation in the wider Middle East or the Mediterranean. But before I do that, I echo what Boris Johnson said. Whether in the EU or out of the EU, Britain belongs to Europe in many, many ways. And by the way, if on second thought, you might reconsider the British people, I can assure you, you will be welcomed by 500 million Europeans to stay or come back.
We're not leaving Europe.
But
we're not going far.
Just so you know that
we're staying very nearby.
Just so you know that, with full respect of the decision by the British people, if on second thought, this people always driven by common sense would come to another judgment, we would all welcome it very, very much.
I think the Commissioner's got to be very careful not to intervene too heavily.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, you know, we believe you belong to us. Whether you're in the EU or out of the EU,
but we pay for you.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But having been educated in the British school system, I feel very passionately about your country. And as I say, let me stress this once again, whether you're in the EU or whether you're not in the EU, in my view, you remain a European nation that belongs to the nation, to our common destiny.
Thank you.
Anyway, enough said about that. Let me pick up on the issue of the Helsinki process and the Mediterranean. Helsinki process, as you know, had 3 dimensions: the security dimension, the economic dimension, and the human dimension. If you look at these 3 dimensions, with all the differences we see in the Mediterranean, they are actually very useful as a starting point to look at the issues of the problems in the Mediterranean. A lot was already said about the security dimension, and being a representative of the European Commission, I shall not dwell on that. I will have a number of things to say about the economic dimension. I think we have a huge opportunity to look into the possibilities of closer economic cooperation. The energy sector was already mentioned, and that's not just the traditional energy sector of fossil fuels. I think if you look at the energy package the Commission has presented yesterday, this is about modernizing our opportunities with fossil fuels, but at the same time using the opportunities of transforming the energy world towards more sustainable energy resources. And in the Mediterranean area, there are huge possibilities to be part of that transformation, not just in the traditional energy field, but combining that with new energy resources, be it solar energy, wind energy, and other sustainable forms of energy. And this is important for the economy because linked with that, you have huge economic possibilities in terms of developing arable land, in terms of services, in terms of closing the distances between nations and across the Mediterranean. So I would say that the economic dimension is of huge importance. The problem on the European side, I have to also mention our problems, is that all too often countries in the southern part of the European Union feel abandoned by other countries in the European Union because the Mediterranean is not seen as their problem. And sometimes countries in Eastern Europe feel abandoned by countries in Western Europe or Southern Europe because when they say they feel threatened in their security by Russia, those other countries are saying that's not our problem. So the first prerequisite for Europe to be able to play a constructive role in the Mediterranean is for the whole of Europe to see the Mediterranean as a collective challenge, which can be achieved if also the whole of Europe sees security from the East as a collective challenge. It's give and take in that sector, and I believe that if we understand that fully, it would give us more instruments to act successfully in the Mediterranean. Now let me also turn to the human dimension. One of the things that is creating a problem for many European politicians to be able to act in this field is what I would perhaps call the discomfort of proximity. Because all the problems one sees in the Mediterranean area are problems one can also see in our own societies. And that leads to discomfort. People, logically, if they feel threatened by things happening in their society, they want that to go away. And one of the reactions is to simply pretend that the proximity isn't there. So to pretend that you can close off by building fences, by building walls from the problems from elsewhere. We need to overcome that because it is a self-defeating reaction. It will only increase our problems if we believe that walls and fences can solve the problems that we share in the wider Mediterranean area. So discomfort needs to be tackled. The human dimension is essential for that. I think we need to invest much, much more across the Mediterranean area in education. I think, look at the demographic challenge, how many young people we have in the Mediterranean area who have no access to education, who do not learn critical thinking, who when they get into education, they are brainwashed into an ideology that gives justification to killing other people. And they are given an education that will not help them be economically independent, economically viable in the modern world, because it will not give them the tools to operate in the economy or in the wider society. So education should be one of our main challenges in our relationship, and investing in education is probably the best investment in future security we can make given the demographic challenges we face. Also, dialogue, which is very often used as a diplomatic tool, dialogue between cultures and civilizations and religions is something that is of the essence. The misunderstandings about Islam in Europe are paralyzing our capacity to act also in the Mediterranean. If the vision of Islam in the European population is narrowed down only to extremism, radicalism, to what I would call neo-Salafism that is out there to destroy our way of life, dialogue is no longer possible. Then you don't see the other person as a different person, possibly an adversary. No, you see them as an enemy. And with an enemy, you don't engage, you try to destroy them, or you try to keep them at bay as much as you can. So I would want to end on that. Never underestimate the human dimension if you want to make a success of security policy, if you want to make a success of economic policy. We need more dialogue, we need more understanding, and most of all, we need much more investment into education that would offer young generations, especially girls and women, access to education that leads to critical thinking. Thank you very much.
Good, right. It's female education is everything. I absolutely agree.
Well, let me push on this last point that you raised. So alongside the issue of education comes the issue of jobs. In other words, even if we were able to invest in preparing the youth in southern and eastern Mediterranean for integration into the new economic sectors, the question becomes, where would the jobs come from? And how would you see sort of a constructive engagement along at least the second vector in Helsinki of an economic vector about to invest in creating jobs?
You're asking me?
Mm-hmm.
I think we are now trying to expand the success of the European Fund for Structural Investment to outside of Europe. This has been a remarkable success in a very short period of time, the so-called Juncker Fund, for the European Union itself, especially the access of SMEs to investment possibilities which were not open to them before has been, I think, a success. And we need to find equal partnerships in the wider Mediterranean area to create the same possibilities of structural investment, to mobilize the possibilities of investment banks, the EIB and others, to work closely with the World Bank and the IMF and others, to create possibilities for much more pinpointed investment, because much which is linked with new technologies, with new energies, etc., is linked with the development of SMEs. It's not just the big corporations, with all due respect to them, but the big corporations very often have easier access to investment possibilities. But if we could create more dynamic relationship with SME sectors in those countries to give them access to EIB funds or other funds, that I would think would have a huge knock-on effect for economic development in areas where you need a lot of employment. You know, the new energy field is an area with a lot of employment at all levels, not just the highest level of education, but also mid-level education. So I would see huge potential there. I think in the agricultural sector, so much is still, potential is still not used. In the services sector, I think given the levels of education that are improving, we can have more success there as well. But long-term investment needs to happen in those countries. For that to happen, you also need a strengthening of the rule of law, which is also a weak point there. And you can't disentangle the two issues. So I would concentrate on these things, and the European Commission stands ready to do that with our partners in the wider Mediterranean area.
A brief comment on education, just to bring the idea to the audience. I come from Egypt. In Egypt, Egypt increases in numbers by 8,000 babies a day. 8,000 babies a day, meaning in 5 years, every day, Egypt needs at least 20 new schools a day, meaning 400 teachers a day. So the magnitude of the challenge only in a country like Egypt is huge, So I fully subscribe to the idea of focus on education. Education is the key for everything and every malaise in our region.
Maybe Mr. Johnson, I can ask you this. So when we talk about the level of engagement, sometimes the question that comes up is whether Europe ought to approach these sort of economic, educational issues in North Africa and Eastern Mediterranean at the same scale that it tackled the crisis in Greece. And if I may put it in sort of in a nutshell, whether it makes sense that the amount that Europe invested in one country, one of its members, in order to preserve the euro and keep them within euro, whether we are at that stage with the Mediterranean concept that it requires investment of that scale, and whether you think politically that's actually possible within the current climate in Europe.
Well, I think that Gianni Di Michelis probably tested the political realities of that 25 years ago, and you know, we're living with the result. We didn't invest then. I don't believe there's the political will now to invest. I listened to Abu very carefully. The figures are extraordinary. I think Egypt's going to have 150 million people in 20 years' time. It's a massive increase that we're seeing.
The Egyptian population increases by 2.5 million a year.
Now, it's not just education, if I may say so, Abu. And I want to echo what Frans said very strongly. I'm afraid I think that when you look at the whole region and you look at the massive demographic changes that are happening, I find it impossible to disconnect that population boom from the need for female education and female literacy. Because everywhere in the world where we've managed to increase the levels of attainment by girls in school and to have equality, as we should, you've seen a stabilization of population, a rise in prosperity. And I think that is where we should be focusing. I wonder whether this whole this conference should make a particular stand on that issue, because I think when I look at that region and I see the growth that is happening and seeing some of the figures that I've seen about female literacy, I think that is the key. That is the key thing to tackle.
So let me shift and go back to something Minister ABOUL-GHEIT said at the beginning. First of all, you're absolutely correct about the Palestinian issue. The reason that I omitted it was not because of its potential and its sort of perennial importance, but at least on the side of the Atlantic that I said, it appeared that it doesn't sort of feature in the urgent issues that are unfolding in the region, and that there is a certain amount of given capacity for diplomatic activity by Europe, US, and countries in the region, that it doesn't occupy the same priority that now Syria and Libya do. But I agree with you that it can actually erupt, and there is not a long-run solution to it, to the region, without addressing that problem. But and definitely, I would welcome continuing on that, particularly because if one were to think how Europe and the US may re-engage on that issue, there has to be some new ideas in terms of where we pick up where Secretary Kerry left off in the last effort that was not successful and perhaps did not have tremendous attention within the region either. But the other issue that you raised, which goes to the heart of how do we engage with the region, is the issue of regional rivalry. For instance, you raised the issue of both Iran and Turkey. There is no, it's not a secret that there is an intense rivalry, particularly between Saudi Arabia and Iran over Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, that there's a great deal of angst in the region after the Iranian nuclear deal as to where the regional dynamic is likely to go. And you mentioned comments like Iran having influence in 4 capitals in the Arab world, cuts to the bone.
They call it hegemony.
That's right. So those basically at least are suggestive that there's a deep chasm that makes it difficult to arrive at certain agreements. On the other hand, we've also seen tensions in Turkish-Arab relations, particularly over the case of Turkish positions on domestic affairs in Egypt, created a sort of a cooling of relations. And now I think, as you mentioned, Turkish insistence on having a role in northern Iraq also suggestive that there might be tensions between Turkey and Iran as well in that theater of conflict. So the key issue becomes, at least maybe from viewpoint of both Europe and the Arab world, is how do you tackle this divide? I mean, how can we get anywhere unless there is a way in which to get the Iranians, Turks, and the Arabs to speak, or at least to agree to speak around a certain goal in the region, which should be stability. So where do we begin, at least, or how can we get to that conversation?
The principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of states, because the tendency is we are a revolutionary force and we intend to expand our revolution through pushing in other states. So, in all honesty, you see, the Iranians in 2006, 2007, 2008 were using Arab issues and Arab cards to defend the nuclear file, because they wanted to show the West that they can affect Western interests in Arab countries. That was the assumption then. But with the nuclear deal, it is very strange that they continue behaving in a manner as if the whole region is theirs. The whole region is not an Iranian region. And the issue of Sunni-Shia divide is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because we never in the world of Islam did we witness that kind of confrontation that we witness today because of the employment of religion to serve national policies, political objectives. The issue is you use religion as an instrument of politics, and that should not be. That should not be.
Completely right. Can I just say, I agree totally with ABOUL. You've put your finger on the whole problem. There are politicians who are twisting and abusing religion and different strains of the same religion in order to further their own political objectives. And that's one of the biggest problems in the whole, political problems in the whole region. And the tragedy for me, and that's why you have these proxy wars being fought the whole time in that area, is that there's not strong enough leadership in the countries themselves. There are not enough big characters.
Yes.
There are not enough big characters, big people, men or women, who are willing to reach out beyond their Sunni or Shia or whatever group to the other side and bring people together. And to develop a national story again. A national story. That's what's lacking. And that's the tragedy. And I've just come from Cyprus, where I've seen one example of how this can happen. And it's not there yet, and it's still very difficult. But you've got two leaders from the Greek community and the Turkish community who are trying, and they're taking risks. They're taking risks, each is taking risks with his own community to try to bring that island together. And I see that in Cyprus, and I have to tell you, I don't see it anywhere else in the region. And that's why you've got international, you've got the Saudis, the Iran, everybody moving in and puppeteering and playing proxy wars. And it's a tragedy to watch it. We need to have some way of encouraging visionary leadership in that area. People who can tell a story that brings people together from different factions and different religious groups into one nation. That's what's missing.
Perhaps our experience with the Helsinki process, as Paolo indicated earlier, might offer some I wouldn't say formats, but some thoughts on how you could do this, because the same problem was Europe's problem in the 1970s. How can you provide security to nations who until now believe they need to subjugate other nations to be safe? And this is the problem, of course, now across the Mediterranean, where Iran thinks it needs to subjugate other nations for its own security. Turkey has sometimes the same impulse, Saudi Arabia the same. You don't solve this by just saying you shouldn't do that. You only solve this if you have a keen eye on which security issues specifically need to be addressed to create a different situation of not wanting to subjugate other nations. And in that context, I strongly believe that the nuclear deal with Iran should be something we should maintain at all cost, because it would exacerbate the problem rather than solve the problem if we would come back to that. But we also need to look at other elements, like we did in Helsinki, of economic investment, the human dimension, that could perhaps alleviate some of the fears some countries have because of the instability in their neighborhood. So the age-old problem of wanting sort of an area under your regard, chasse gardée, because that is necessary for your security, is still there. Sadly, also in Europe, if you see the behavior of the Russian Federation, which is exactly the same. So this needs careful diplomatic attention in the broadest possible way, and Europe should be part of that also in the wider Mediterranean.
You see, my problem with this Helsinki approach is that if the concept of Helsinki has been offered Europeans in 1945 or 1950, no one would have grasped the logic.
Good point. Very good point.
Logic.
Yes.
The Middle East and the East Mediterranean and Southern Mediterranean is in the midst of a war of people killing each other, and you don't know why they are killing each other.
Absolutely.
So have your priorities laid down proper.
Yes.
I, in all honesty, feels that priority one is defeating Daesh, ISIS, ISIL, and terrorism. Defeat them. They will stay with us for years, if not decades. Do not deceive yourself. They will be defeated militarily as armies, but they will stay as ideology and as dormant cells or small cells that are ready to strike anywhere and everywhere. So defeat them first. Then try to reconcile differences inside societies. And that will entail lots of economic effort and lots of education. Without economic and education, forget it, because the war will continue and continue to eternally. Look for a Westphalian peace, whereby the national state is reborn, and peace and security and economic revival is ensured. But do not jump to conclusions by saying we will pursue Helsinki today. The conditions are not available today.
I think it is a very fair comment, and I subscribe to it completely. But the world also moves much faster than it did 30, 40 years ago. So opportunities will arise much faster, and we need to be ready to take them once we see them. And let me just make one comment from a country where we've seen, from my country, also the Netherlands, foreign fighters go to Syria to join Daesh. And one wonders, from a society which one could call pretty rich, that we have not been able to inspire part of our younger generation to be part of our society. And they feel inspired by a murderous nihilist ideology and even want to give their lives for that murderous nihilist ideology. Something has gone wrong in our societies as well that this is happening. So in that sense, fighting Daesh also means you need to fight the recruitment grounds for Daesh. And this comes with giving opportunity, fighting discrimination, improving our educational systems, an inclusive society. So in that sense, you know, fighting Daesh is not just a military operation, it's also an ideological, I would say, operation in your societies just as much as in ours. And that we're in the same boat as far as that's concerned.
You know, the president of Egypt is insisting in modernizing Islam. And he lectures all the time of the need of how to allow Islam and Muslims to embrace modernity. I keep telling my European friends, in France, give us 1,000 scholarships a year for Egyptian sheikhs and mullah to join Sorbonne, and in Holland, and in Cambridge, and in Oxford. If you allow thousands of mullahs joining European universities, receiving opening on the West, that hatred to the West might not continue. It will change. It will change. So the important thing is to exchange, to build bridges.
I agree. I agree. 1,000 mullahs.
1,000 mullahs, yes.
Enrolled at Oxford and Cambridge.
Why not?
Why not? Okay, well, will you fund it?
No, that is the problem. I do not have the resources to fund them.
I'm sure someone in this audience could help out.
Mind you,
look, I mean, it's a good idea.
All the sheikhs of Egypt who over the 19th century and 20th century were instrumental in Egyptian modernity learned the sciences in the West.
Yes.
So open up for them.
Yeah, and Oxford and Cambridge would not have existed in their current form if it had not been for Averroes and Avicenna and all the Muslim scholars who preserved Aristotle.
Fully agree with that.
Yes, and you thought you'd like that point, and it's true. It's true, but you know, we do what we can. We have the Chevening program, ladies and gentlemen. There may be some Chevening scholars here. We try to get as many international students as we can. 1 in 7, ABOUL, 1 in 7 of the kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers in the world today were educated in our country, I'm proud to say. Obviously, we want to increase
and my son
that.
too.
And your son, and everybody is welcome, by the way, you know, provided they pay the fees and all the rest of it. We want to be open to talent. We want to do that, and I think it's a very good idea. But just going back to France's point, you know, they were all guilty thing, the Heinz kiosk, as we used to say, the idea that there are also, let's face it, there are also middle-class jihadis.
Yes,
absolutely. There are many doctors.
Yes.
People from respectable professions who go off to join Daesh, and we have to think what's going on in their heads too. And it's a very, very complex issue, and I think it's important that we are defeating Daesh on the ground. They have had a huge reduction of their territory, both a 40% reduction of their territory in Iraq, 20% reduction in Syria. We are making progress, folks. We shouldn't be too... and Italy, as I said earlier on, has played a leading role in that.
Well, it's also important to note that, you know, the education part of clerics and mullahs is very important, but that's really dealing with sort of the supply side of knowledge. But ultimately, there has to be a social base for moderation, which means you have to have a prosperous middle class that actually benefits from trade and relationship with global economy and the like, and and sees its economic interests reflected in moderation. And ultimately, you know, moderate clerics don't solve the problems of youth in Europe unless they can actually show them a path to integration and show them a path to empowerment. There has to be a demand side for moderation as well, in addition to sort of supply of moderation. But just before turning to the audience, you know, we talked a lot about Helsinki, but some of the points that Ahmed raised are interesting in the sense that, so we're looking at the Middle East, maybe another sort of historical parallel is the 30-year war, and you referred also to Peace of Westphalia. So, you know, the Arab world, as you said, has been going through a period of destruction. Two of its largest, historically most important countries, Iraq and Syria, lost control of large parts of their territory. They're in civil war. Egypt, the third most important of the top three, has gone through a great deal of internal tumult. And at the same time, the other two neighbors in the region, now obviously Israel included, its situation hasn't changed. Iran and Turkey have come out of this crisis without any internal disturbance that has really weakened their position. So should we really actually be talking about a new regional order that would address some of the issues you raised? In other words, what's the nature of or Congress of Vienna or a Peace of Westphalia deal in the Middle East? And secondly, who's going to convene it? I mean, clearly, these countries are not talking to each other. Iran and Saudi Arabia are actually not talking at all. Whether the Arab League is the right place to start the conversation. I mean, some of the issues that you raised, that if you were to go to Ankara and Tehran and put these on the table, whether it's the European Union as an outside balancer, as a interested party in the fate of the Mediterranean, which is the theme of this conference, should take it upon itself to convene that sort of grand Congress of Vienna type of a situation to build the rules of the game, negotiate state building.
I think it's very interesting.
Vali, forget it. Why is it to forget it? I have a certain logic. You have the Arab world, and the Arab League is the embodiment of the Arab world. That is the core of the Middle East. Okay. Then you have the neighbors. The neighbors are between 3 to 4. You have Iran, you have Turkey. Do not, please, forgo Israel, because it is in the center and occupying the principal issue of the Arab world, occupying Palestinian territory. Then you have the fourth, possibly and possibly not, Ethiopia. Possibly and possibly not. So you have the outer core, which is Iran, Turkey, Israel. Iran and Israel will never talk for the foreseeable future. Iran and Turkey are in competition all the time, silent but very severe competition. And then you have that pressure of let's expand in the vacuum areas. The vacuum areas are sadly today Al-Mashriq. A place was the core of the Arab League, no more to be found. So you need first to reorganize your order, to build potential. Again, I insist, defeat Daesh, defeat terrorism. And then from there we see. But you offer the Arab world into a contract with the region, it is a weak Arab world, and they will never accept to. I was in Sir Benyas last week in Emirates, and the problem is the Iranians are making offers to Gulf, but telling them your strategic depth should not be participating. The strategic depths, I mean a place like Egypt and a place like Jordan. That is the strategic depth of Saudi Arabia and Gulf. You cannot tackle them alone. You have to take them as a block. But they are not yet ready.
But just very specifically on a number of issues, where you raised the issue of the European Union, what could the European Union do? I think one of the small advantages we have as European Union, we are not intimately linked to one of the parties in the proxy wars. So in that sense, we are not seen as sponsor of one or the other as much as other outside powers like the United States and Russia are. So that gives us a slightly more balanced position, I would argue. Secondly, we urgently need to come up, yes, we need to fight Daesh, but we urgently need to come up with a comprehensive plan for the future of Syria, because if we don't do that, you know, all the other stuff is not going to work either. If the bloodshed and barbarism doesn't stop in Syria, and that to do that, you need these outside powers. You need to go beyond the countries you mentioned
absolutely,
before.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think Frans, maybe we're being a bit too negative about this. Maybe there is scope for some kind of much bigger conversation about all these conflicts, where you see so often the same actors, the same proxy actors, or the same puppeteers, if you like, having a hand in what is going on, and you can't help but wonder if you got everybody round the table and you tried to create some sort of sense of what the grand bargain could be and where one side could give ground and another side could accept some, maybe you could make some progress. But at the moment, I think it is absolutely shambolic, and I totally agree about getting rid of Daesh first. You've got to get rid of Daesh, but then that doesn't solve the problem.
So I'm told we have a little bit of time to have questions from the audience. Yes, this gentleman here. And if you wait for the microphone.
Thank you. I am the Deputy Foreign Minister of Turkey. So I spent almost all my diplomatic life in Middle East, in Arab countries, including Mosul, Iraq, as Consul General in the very dangerous times, 2011-12. I agree with that we should counter sectarianism. This is a disaster for the Middle East, for Muslim countries. But Turkish positions here are mischaracterized by two speakers, you and you. Turkey is not rival to Arab states. We talk every country in Arab world and in Iran. Certainly there are disagreements, but criticizing a brutal regime in Syria or a military coup in a friendly country, this is not intervention in military, in internal affairs. I really don't respect that someone who is not border to Iraq, they cannot understand our position. We face the consequences of crisis in Iraq for 4 decades. We pay huge prices, but whenever Iraqi friends need assistance, we go there. Now we have 600 Turkish troops there, 600. Until now, they did train local people from Mosul to fight Daesh and just protected themselves. This presence is not the reason for any problem in Iraq, sir. It is the result of wrong policies in Iraq that are directly affecting us, including sectarianism. I will talk about these issues tomorrow in the sessions, but we are a peace-loving country. We know well-established rules of international relations. We respect it. But we are bordered to Syria and Iraq. We have to take our measures to counter threats to our national security. And unfortunately, we pay the price for mistakes of our nations. Thank you.
over there.
Thank you very much. I wish to make a comment and a question at the same time. My comment would be, I think I'm coming from Iran. The problem we have in our part of the world is we have not yet fully grasped the consequences of the nation state. The problem is we do not have a theory within Islam which justifies the nation state. That's why every other and then someone will rise up and talk in the name of Islam or in the name of Arabs or in the name of Iranians or Turks or whatever. That's a problem. And I think we have to articulate a theory within Islam which justifies the nation state. Otherwise, for instance, you justify in the intervention of Saudi Arabia in Yemen because that's the Arab countries. It justifies with the same reason to interfere in the affairs of another country in the name of Islam, and another country would justify it in the name of neo-Osmanism or whatever. I think they're all wrong, and we should be clear about that. We do not recognize these extra nation-state concepts because we have been hostage to such a kind of conceptualization, and we are all better off if we agree with and stick to the idea of the nation state. Thank you.
What I want to say in response to what you said, sir, we talked earlier about the Westphalian peace. And in political theory, you always refer to the Westphalian peace because it sort of enshrined the nation state. But there's another part to the Westphalian peace which is just as important, which is introducing religious tolerance, accepting the differences in religion, and taking away religion as the fuel to all the conflicts in Europe. And in that sense, I was triggered by what you said. You need to find the same form of dialogue also in the Mediterranean, where you create the possibility of a nation state, but take out of the equation religious confrontation. I think that is the lesson of the Westphalia peace that did a great service to Europe, which is very necessary now also in the Mediterranean world.
Absolutely right. One question this side, please.
I think there is another dimension which has not been discussed here. It is the dimension of the children who are living under Daesh. If you take, for example, Raqqa, this is the 6th year that has been under Daesh. It means that the child who had 9 years, he has now 15 years. And it means the one who has 10 years, he has 16 years, and etc., etc. Do you know how Daesh is teaching mathematics in their schools? I will give you an example. What we discovered in Mosul after liberating so many part of it in the east part, we found it in their books, how they teach mathematics. They say 3 Kalashnikov plus 3 Kalashnikov, it means 6 Kalashnikov. And it says, if a mujahid is going to kill himself among a group of 10 persons, 7 of them are killed, the others are wounded, how much they rest? It means 10 minus 7, it means 9, 3 of them has been wounded. This is the future of this generation of Daesh, of children who is living under Daesh. So if this continue, if Raqqa and all others will not be liberated, believe me, we will have a whole generation of Daesh, educated, taught, because they don't see anything else. Television, radio, wash brain, trained, etc. They started to teach them, to train them at the age of 6. So the main urgent goal, it is to liberate these areas, that not to let Daesh to educate a generation and generation. Because if 10% of this population, of these kids, will keep Daesh idea, theory, etc., believe me, there will be thousands. And thank you.
You want to make any comment? Or?
No, nothing to add to that.
Okay.
I agree.
Let me see. There's this gentleman here.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Safar. I'm the Libyan ambassador in Rome. And I just wanted to add my input in regard to Libya. It is a success story in the making, but it is a success story already. And I thank Minister Gentiloni for bringing up a few of the points ahead. But there's a positive agenda in what's really happening already that could be built upon for the future success in the fight against Daesh, in the fight against extremism, and also for engaging the local population on board in such approach. A year ago, Daesh in Sirte, the coastal city of Sirte, was controlling 90 miles of the coast of Sirte on the Mediterranean. Today, literally, Daesh controls very few hundred meters in 2 blocks or 3 blocks in the city of Sirte, with hundreds and hundreds of Daesh fighters being killed in the process. This is a success story that is not widely reported upon, but it is a success story. And it brings about the success story in multiple dimensions. First of all, the fight on the ground was fought by local forces, loyal to the GNA, to the Government of National Accord. Secondly, it's brought about in a success story because it was a coordinated effort by the international community as well. The role of Italy was very instrumental in supporting logistical support and intelligence support to the fighters on the ground. The hospital that has been built in Misrata to treat the wounded is a very important step and a message of commitment towards the country. The United States, Britain, and other friendly countries have been contributing in different ways as well. So there is success happening on the ground that needs to be reported upon, needs to be learned from, and needs to be replicated on a wider scale as well. And it's based on 3 basic principles: local ownership when it comes to the fight against terrorism, but also international support that is committed, not just in terms of political standing, but also in terms of actual support on the ground. Healthcare, treatment of the wounded, and direct support is relevant in this case. On another note, and I just want to bring the notion of the return of the national state, which I think is a rightly brought about notion, but, and this is pretty much a question also to Mr. Ahmed ABOUL-GHEIT, the Honorable President of the Arab League. In 2011 and the last part of 2010, nobody in the Arab world actually called the Arab Spring the Arab Spring. They only had one request, which is the fall of the regimes they've governed for such a long time, without much prospects for young people for the future. And this is not a statement about a political statement as much as a point in time in which people felt the lack of hope of the future. This is about governance, mostly, but it's also about what's been aching behind the scenes in those society. Corruption is at the top of the scale, I would say. People got fed up, young people particularly, of no prospects for the future and continuing to see the same corrupt practices over and over again over decades. And I think it's rightly to say that people will end up revolting. I don't put that back to anger of young people and resorting to religion, as much as actually people just having no way to go in terms of meeting their aspirations and having their voice heard politically, economically, and socially. So I think it is The return of the national state in those countries is important and it's paramount, but it has to be fundamentally a different national state than we used to have in the region. And I think this is where democratization needs to have a way to go, but obviously within the context of what's going on in the region. And I agree that Daesh needs to be defeated first before we start seeding the way for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I know this conversation could go on much further. Please join me in thanking our panelists for a very rich discussion.